Christine Staricka is a registered international board certified lactation consultant and trained childbirth educator. As the host of the Lactation Training Lab podcast, her current role focuses on training, supporting, and coaching current and aspiring lactation care providers through a membership, community, social media, and her blog on Substack. Christine created and developed the first 100 hours concepts and early lactation framework designed to support lactation care providers with the knowledge and mindset they need for help to help families optimize early lactation. Christine also worked as a hospital-based IBCLC for 10 years and has over 21 years experience providing clinical lactation care and support. She provides clinical lactation care to families at Baby Cafe Bakersfield. Apologize for that. And serves as the director. Christine recently completed 6 years of service on the board of the United States Lactation Consultant Association, and she holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Phoenix. She has been married for 28 years, lives in California, and is a proud mother of 3 amazing daughters. So we're very fortunate and happy to have her be our speaker this month. So go ahead, Christine. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Tulare-Kings Breastfeeding Coalitions. Thank you to Adventist Health. And thank you so much to all of you who are taking the time to join us today and be part of this learning opportunity and conversation starter. That's how I tried to think of it when I was putting it together. I have so many thoughts about just the whole topic of sleep and breastfeeding and sleep training and everything around those topics. I have so many thoughts, and I really wanted to sit down, to myself before I put this together and think about this and try to separate out where my biases are and what is, what is my opinion and how is that feeding into my practice. And what am I responsible to as an IBCLC? What are my responsibilities? I really think that we have to constantly be reviewing what we are expected to be doing for people, because what happens here is that, everybody on here cares about what happens with lactation and breastfeeding, and we care deeply for the people that we are taking care of. And we are influenced by the same things that they are sometimes. And I do see that happening where there's so much information flooding the market for parents. And you may have heard me speak or seen that I also speak on the proliferation of products for breastfeeding that have just taken over what lactation looks like, especially in the United States. I only say especially because that's where I am, but I know that that's true in other places as well, but also seeing the same thing happening with sleep information. And I think there's been this really huge change over the years that I've been in this work. And in the beginning, the main conversations around sleep when we talked about lactation had to do with safety. And that makes a lot of sense, right? We talked so much about safe sleep. We talked about making sure that babies are sleeping in safe environments. We talked about how to keep people safe when they don't have access to the same resources as other people. And all of a sudden, it seems like the conversation about sleep has become so much more focused on how can we get babies to sleep differently? How can we change how they sleep? How can we get more sleep as parents? And a lot of the safety part has been shoved aside in these conversations. And so I really wanted to put all of those things together and bring you something that will hopefully make you think and help us all as lactation advocates to make sure that when we are listening, when we are reading, when we are being exposed to content out in the world that has to do with these topics, that we're looking at it through that lens of, what our responsibilities truly are and how we can demonstrate the commitment that we actually have to people without being sort of taken up in that wave of the information that's trying to get desperate people who want sleep badly to sort of just get washed up, you know, in all of this information and courses and things that they can spend money on. Sleep consultants and sleep training programs can really prey on people if they're not presented properly and if people don't know what to look for. And I also think that I've seen a lot of people in our field have the same reaction, you know, also be sort of swept away. And I don't think that that's fair to us. I don't think that's really a great way for us to have to face this topic. So I want to raise some questions that hopefully together we can all work on, you know, as a group, so that as we move forward and we continue to see more and more of these messages about sleep and sleep training, that we know exactly what to say and exactly what to do, so that we really are helping the families in our care. So this is a health equity approach, because as lactation advocates and lactation care providers, we are here to ensure that everyone has access to information that is going to help keep them healthy. And we know and we understand, because we are responsible to understand the different opportunities that people have and the different situations that people find themselves in, based on a lot of factors that feed into how their life is actually being lived. And we know that in the United States, especially, that racism and structural racism play a huge part in health. And we want to examine each and everything that feeds into a person's health and make sure that where there is a place that we can make a change to make the environment more equitable for people so that everyone can be healthy, that we examine each of those pieces. And this is just one little piece of that, but a really important one. This is me. I am Christine Staricka. I am in California, and I have a little information here. I was born and raised on the unceded lands of the Mattancock people, which you might know as New York. I gave birth to my 3 daughters and I live and practice on the unceded lands of the Yokuts people, and that is in Bakersfield, California, that we know it as Bakersfield today. I don't have any relevant financial relationships with ineligible companies to disclose for this presentation. We will talk about why lactation care providers need to be able to communicate clearly with parents about sleep training. And this is not something that should just come up because the person asked about it, or because, you know, it just sort of happened. This is something we really need to be talking to everyone about and providing anticipatory guidance. I'll help you identify 2 practice guiding documents that govern your practice to help you practice ethically, so that you can be sure you are operating within the boundaries of what you are trained and certified to do. And I'll help you name 3 questions that you'll need to consider in order to help someone, a client who is using or considering sleep training practices. It could be a client, it could just be someone you know. Things that you can help them think about when they are assessing a program or a book or a course or a consultant, something that they're thinking about using as a way of helping improve their baby's sleep and probably their own as well. So let's begin here. The real reality of the US-based lactation care provider is that we understand that racism and bias are impacting breastfeeding supports at every level. There are so many societal barriers to people meeting their breastfeeding goals, and racism and bias are a huge part of that in this country. We also know that cultural knowledge about infant sleep impacts parental decision-making and behaviors. How people approach baby sleep and how they think about it and what they feel comfortable with is very, very informed by their culture, by their ancestors, and by the people who are around them. And at the same time, we also know that we do not have paid family leave that covers everybody, and we don't have it that covers everybody for very long. So that means that work and societal pressures and schedules do not work very well for babies and the way that they wake up during the night and the lactation needs of both members of the dyad. So those things don't really fit very well together, and that makes a very challenging situation for new parents. Lactation care providers are in this endless circle of conflict because we're ethically bound to promote and protect exclusive breastfeeding. We also know that not all clients that we see desire exclusive breastfeeding. So many are using other routines and they're using other modes of feeding and they're using milk expression. So we also need to be able to provide them information about how certain practices and behaviors will impact those methods. We know that exclusivity and sleep manipulation are not always compatible. Without support and guidance from someone like us, a lactation expert, who is also bound to protect and promote optimal infant development. So sometimes we're being asked questions about sleep training and sleep manipulation by people who are going to do them. And we have to be able to answer those questions when we also know that some of the things they're asking us about are not compatible with optimal infant development. So we need to be able to talk about a lot of things and put a lot of things together. And sometimes the easiest way to do that when it starts to get complicated is actually to introduce some questions and have the conversation really be a conversation back and forth, rather than feeling like we're responsible to spit out a bunch of information to our clients, but helping them find the questions they need to ask so that they can actually get the information that they need. So as we talk about sleep training today, I just wanted to point out that this is not one thing. This is not, a presentation where I'm talking about one method or one book or program or anything like that. We are going to talk about this term very, very broadly. Mostly I'm referring to techniques and teachings which are marketed to parents as a way to get babies to sleep more and or to require less parental responsiveness if they wake. Why? Why are we talking about that bundle of techniques? Because those are the things that are most likely to impact lactation and people's ability to meet their own goals. So some people consider sleep training to be like a bundle of techniques, a pile of different things that they can do. Some believe that it's just one strategy or there's just one way to do this. Sometimes it's presented as a package of knowledge that helps parents understand infant sleep better. And to yet others, it might mean using extinction methods like leaving the baby to cry on their own until they simply stop. So this is going to encompass a lot of things all together. And I just wanted to point that out because I'm really not talking about one specific thing, but rather the whole concept of things which are marketed to parents as ways to help with their baby's sleep. Oops, I pressed the wrong button. Are you still able to see my slides? I really hope so, because I pressed the wrong button.
Yes.
Okay, so you can still see. I simply need to go back to where I was. There we go. So here's some reasons that we really should be talking to parents about sleep training. It's really quite simple. I am really lucky to be able to work on a team of people who work with parents together in a baby cafe. So we feel like we're never alone. We always have somebody else who can help us as we have conversations with people. When we're teaching them about something, there's always someone else nearby to pop in and say, oh yeah, and also this, and provide practical information and just other ways of saying things, which I think is super helpful. And one day recently, when I was talking to a family about sleep, one of my colleagues came by and she just, popped in out of nowhere with this comment that I thought was really, really important. And what she said was that we have to make sure that sleep training isn't getting in the way of the biology of breastfeeding. Okay, the presentation is over, right? Like that's the fundamental thing. We have to make sure that people are able to get the help with sleep that they need, but without interfering with the biology of how lactation actually works. And those two things can be really hard to put together, but that's our job. That's what we're here for. So that's why we are responsible to be doing that. But it's one of the main reasons that we do need to be responsible to, to try to help people put that information together. So when we make sure that sleep training isn't getting in the way of biology or infant development, what we're really doing is helping people get closer to meeting their own goals. We know that lactation physiology makes it, a reality that you have to remove milk frequently to sustain milk production, that infant development involves frequent waking during the day and night. there's no difference between the day and night. That means that nothing is happening at night. So it's really important that everything that happens during the day has the opportunity to continue during the night. Now, yes, certain things do happen differently in the night, like hormone production is different during the night than it is during the day. And that's one of the things we really need to share with people, that their prolactin levels, which prolactin being the hormone that drives milk production, they're higher at night. There has to be a physiological reason, right? And when we point that out to people, the ways that our bodies work in those, what we know about how the body works, that really speaks to what we need to understand about how that matches up with what babies need. More milk is made during the night because babies are supposed to be waking up and feeding during the night. So this is an important fact for people to know, whether they're feeding their baby from their body or using milk expression and getting milk out to feed the baby. So it's an important part of lactation physiology. Now, here's another place that I see people being, marketed to in strange ways that seem a little bit tangential or unrelated, but they actually are. I listen to a lot of podcasts that are about entrepreneurial business kind of things. And sometimes when they're talking about new ideas, or they're giving examples of, say, online courses that somebody might be teaching, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard podcasters say, now these are people who are experts in marketing, business, social media, content creation, things like that. I cannot tell you how many times they throw in there, alongside all those things, sleep training, sleep consultants. And whether that is because they themselves have used it, or it's just something that they've heard of, what is happening is that it's being mentioned in places like that, and places, all over. Parents are hearing this message that sleep is something that you need to get training on, and you need to do something about it. You need to work at this. And if you don't, well, wait, what's going to happen? So it gives people this impression that sleep training is this critical thing that parents need to be taught. But interestingly, you do not hear necessarily the same messaging coming in these tangential ways around, say, childbirth preparation or prenatal education about how lactation works, things like that. Because this sleep training thing has become almost an industry that has its own wheels, and it's this thing that's just becoming something people think of as normal, like a lot of people do it, so I need to do it. And whether it's the training or the products that go along with it, it's just becoming bigger and bigger every day. This information and this message about sleep training, it's kind of everywhere people are going for information about their babies. And not everything that they're finding is compatible with meeting lactation goals, but they don't know that. And then lactation care providers have also been expressing confusion and stress about how to address this and how to counsel parents in their care who are using sleep training techniques and methods. So as lactation care providers, regardless of our certification or our role or our setting, we need to be able to approach these things that we hear about and these things that our clients are using. We need to be able to look at them through a clear lens and be able to ask those questions like, how would this technique, or how would this product, or how would this course and what it teaches affect this person's physiology of lactation? How is it going to impact that? And you'll hear me come back to that later. And this really goes back to ethics and serving the client and what they want. But it's really important just to know that parents are receiving this message in so many ways in their lives, that they need to teach their baby to sleep, that they need to teach their baby to fall asleep or to stay asleep, that their baby needs to learn or be taught to self-soothe. And the second part of that is that if they don't, there will be negative consequences. Something will happen that they don't want to happen. There will be a bad ending to that. They don't always say exactly what that negative consequence will be, and sometimes they do say what that negative consequence will be. Here's the thing though. The research on long-term outcomes does not really support that. Babies eventually develop the skills to do all of those things: fall asleep, stay asleep, self-soothe. They develop those skills when they are neurologically ready. And this is a really important place to point out that in our country, we have a high preterm birth rate. And so some of the people who are being marketed this information about sleep training and all of these sleep programs and products, they're being marketed to people who really have a bigger risk if they use them, because preterm babies' sleep hygiene and routines are different. Preterm babies have different development, and it's very important that parents of preterm babies know that they should not be using the same things as people whose babies were born at term. This is a matter of maturity and neurological development. And just like eating is a function of neurodevelopment, so is sleeping. And those are really important things to follow along. We know that if we interfere with feeding or we feed in ways that are not physiological, that there are impacts. If we interfere with sleeping, then there can also be impacts. So the idea that we have to intervene with how babies sleep is not really logical. It does not really match the physiology of how humans work. And it's very important to also point out that we understand that our clients want, and in many cases need, help understanding how to manage how their babies are sleeping. I am not going to stand here and say, it's no big deal, just get used to it. And I certainly don't tell clients that. That's not how this works. But we really do need to take an honest look at how much emphasis we're putting on this and spend perhaps more time looking at how we support people in the 4th trimester, the postpartum care that we give them, and advocating for policies and legislation that are going to support parents to be able to take care of their babies in the ways that we know are physiological. So they're being bombarded with this message everywhere they go, and they start to assume that it's beneficial or a choice, and it can also become something that is trendy and that they want to do because other people are doing it, and that's what people in their cultural, social circle are doing. So it feels like an important thing to do, even if it doesn't feel instinctively right or necessary for them. I thought this was a really important point to make as well. In this 2018 piece from the wonderful Kimberly Seals-Allers, she wrote that women also struggle in the postpartum period to establish their maternal identity, which is connected to having competence in maternal behaviors, such as breastfeeding. So maternal and parental behaviors include all caregiving aspects: soothing, feeding, dressing, stimulating, teaching, sleep. And parents who are struggling with understanding their baby's sleep patterns, or who are physiologically overwhelmed and exhausted by how their baby sleeps and wakes and expresses needs in the night as well, they feel like they're not taking good care of their baby. Additionally, when people are marketed to that it's necessary for them to learn something and teach something to their babies about sleep, this can also result in them feeling as if they're not doing enough and they don't know what they're doing. The more we tell parents that they don't know what they're doing and remove their agency, the harder it is for them to follow what their babies are actually communicating that they need. Another piece that I feel is a really important stimulation of ideas in this type of conversation is really thinking about how parents can perceive these conflicting messages. When nighttime parenting activities are stigmatized, any nighttime activities, so sleep training or bed sharing or feeding babies during the night or letting babies cry it out, whatever the nighttime parenting activities are, parents often end up feeling like they can't be right. Nothing they do is right. There's just no way they're ever going to be right. Maybe they've made a choice that feels like it makes sense for them, and it's something that's common with their friends. Maybe they're going to face some pressure from their older relatives and their own parents. If they're doing something that is totally against the grain of everyone they know, but it feels right for them, they may feel as if everything on social media tells them that what they're choosing is wrong, or all of their friends think that they're doing things wrong. It's really very easy for parents to feel stigmatized in the choices that they're making and the way that they're accomplishing feeding their babies, when societal barriers from so many angles are preventing them from meeting their goals and leading them to these social isolation chambers where they feel like they've made choices that make sense to them, and they just can never find anybody who thinks that they're right. Nobody ever agrees or respects their decisions or their choices. And we have to ask ourselves, and many parents ask themselves, if we're truly wired to respond to babies during the night and at all times, how can we say that at certain times it's okay to ignore them or to overlook or to delay response? If responsiveness is important in feeding and in all types of caring for the baby, then how can we ever say that at any time of the day or night, it's okay not to respond? We simply understand infant development to be something that is dependent on a caregiver. Human infants are not capable of caring for themselves the way that many other animals are when they're born. And it just becomes a situation where this responsiveness needs consistency. It's not simply that babies are being responded to, it's the consistency of them being responded to with whatever that they are asking to be, provided to them. When they have that consistent responsiveness, that is one of the most important things that impacts their development. So maybe you're asking yourself, well, do we belong in this conversation? Why are we talking about this in what we do? Well, here's one of the things that, can help you inform how you go forward with some of this information and these thought processes. Based on what we know in this field about how many families with new babies are impacted by poor breastfeeding support due to things like racial bias, systemic racism, a history of trauma, a lack of societal structural supports for breastfeeding, fractured healthcare systems which separate mothers and parents from their babies in terms of who is cared for by whom, effects of product marketing on new parents' decisions about infant care, what we know about preterm babies, what we know about the high rate of preterm birth and the high rates of infant mortality and maternal mortality. We have an obligation to speak up as advocates for perinatal child health because we understand what an important factor breastfeeding and lactation are to health for both mothers and babies. This is a really important piece of why we belong in this conversation and why we can never let this conversation be taken over by anybody who does not have lactation knowledge and this understanding of how important it is in the life cycle. So we do know that there's some research from 2020 which looked at sleep intervention literature. So they found that 81% of sleep intervention literature and 61% of parent help books are dedicated to interventions which involve ignoring their baby, not being responsive to their baby. And there is no area of health in which we ever say that it's okay to ignore what's going on. Right? We don't say that about anything else. But for some reason, this persistent thought that we should be ignoring signals that a dependent human being is giving has persisted. It just has pervaded us, and it's getting bigger and bigger. There's the online overwhelm effect that parents and families can experience, and we can also experience this too. So this quick Google search right here, this little screenshot, there are more than 75 million results here to this Google search for the words sleep training for babies. Because people are looking for this information. People need help. People want to find a way to get more sleep or to feel more well rested because they have to get up and go to work. Right? We've talked about all these barriers that make this difficult. So we can never forget why people are looking for this information. What we really want to do is make sure that we are able to provide it in a way that isn't going to interfere with their health. People are looking for this information online, which means that just like with anything else that you look for online, you're going to get a mass of overwhelming messages, a lot of things that are not going to really apply, especially when it comes to babies. People encounter a lot of information about lactation, about sleep, about baby care, things that just don't apply to them because that's not what's happening for them. And they don't really have a great way to filter that information. That's kind of our job. That's one of the biggest things that we do nowadays. Or they find themselves a little echo chamber somewhere, an online support group or an article or some blogs where they can simply expose themselves over and over to the same messages which support what they already thought or what they wanted to do. So they're not really learning anything. They're simply supporting what they thought they wanted to do anyway. And that's not always a negative. That can be a positive thing as well. But we do still have this role of helping them to filter what information is accurate and what is relevant to their specific situation. That's what modern lactation care providers do, whether it's information about lactation or about sleep. That's what we do. So it's within our capacity to sit with them and to talk about their hopes and their dreams, to think about their vision for what it's going to be like to take care of this baby going forward, how their feeding goals are going and how, where they want those goals to go, and help them sort through all of their planned actions relating to breastfeeding and lactation, whether that is working outside the home, attending school away from their baby, using a pump to provide human milk feeding, utilizing a tactic that's designed to override a baby's cues for communication. Each of these actions will have consequences on lactation, and there's no one else in the world that's more qualified than we are to do this work. And that's why we're talking about this today. So fortunately, there are some practice guiding documents that help us to define our role and understand where we are. It's our education, certification, and duty that tells us what we are responsible to do. So let's never forget to account for the fact that each of us arrived at our first day of lactation training with existing ideas and opinions about babies and sleep. Some of those were influenced by personal experiences with our siblings, our own children, maybe our grandchildren. Some of that was influenced by what we read or consumed in the mainstream media. Some were embedded in us in our trainings as lactation care providers. Some were embedded in us in our trainings to achieve other healthcare licenses or certifications previous to that. Then we enter the lactation training funnel. And lactation education programs typically outline the science regarding human lactation and infant sleep. Often they will compare the facts and conclude that sleep training is completely incompatible with lactation. This type of education and this type of separation and saying that there's just no way is not helpful for the clients that we see today. And it doesn't always connect the learner with the practice guiding documents that actually give us more responsibility to do more than simply say, well, that doesn't work with lactation. We can't go there. We need to be able to help people with what they're thinking about, what they're considering, or what they're already using, and apply that information in their situation. So we have practice guiding documents as IBCLCs. So what I want to be clear is that non-IBCLC lactation care providers who practice independently or who are simply working with clients, maybe there's no specific guidance around this topic from whoever trained you. Maybe there's no code or clinical competencies that you really have around this. That's okay, because IBCLCs do. And you can simply say, here's a way that I can know that I am giving my clients the best information about sleep and lactation. I'm going to follow what IBCLCs have to do, even if I'm not one, even if I don't ever want to be one, or it's going to be a really long time before I become one, because it really helps you to cement what your duty and your responsibility are. So I do want you to reflect on what you brought to the table when you first started in this work, and maybe where your thoughts have evolved to at this point about this. And just know that there's always room to learn more. And that's what we want. We want opportunities to learn more. We don't want to shut our minds off and say, well, there's just no way that any of that stuff is ever going to work. We want to be open because we know that our clients are open to this. So if you are committed to health through advocating for breastfeeding, are you committed to parents and babies? And are you committed to being a force for good? Cool. Hop on the bus with us. Us IBCLCs, that's what we do. We are very committed here. And we have some really great practice guiding documents. So commit yourself to following them as if you were an IBCLC. There's plenty of room because we need lots of help along the way. And we all need to know this information. We all need to be practicing the same way. I would really like all lactation care providers to have kind of a simple framework to help you consider how you talk to parents about sleep training and lactation, and then to help decide how you will practice ethically around this within your boundaries of your certifications and trainings, and then feel confident that you know how to seek evidence-based information about any kind of sleep information that your clients are relying on or that you are coming across on social media or through trainings. How will you vet that information? How will you know that it's actually evidence-based? I really want you to have this framework. So here in our clinical competencies, we know that we are responsible to support practices which promote breastfeeding and discourage practices which interfere with breastfeeding. Okay, so we have lots of clear guidance here to say things that are going to promote for somebody whose goal is to breastfeed. We need to support that, and we need to point out for them if they're doing things that might interfere with their plans to breastfeed. It doesn't mean we persuade people to breastfeed or that we, keep people breastfeeding when they don't want to. It's our role to be the experts who provide the information they need to make sure that they can meet their goals. So when we apply that to sleep information, we can easily see any technique or strategy designed to limit or eliminate nighttime contact between a lactating parent and their baby could impact the frequency of their feedings, the duration of their feedings, the frequency of milk removal, the synchrony of milk production and hormonal signaling, the dysregulation of their infant communication, and more. So we really need to be sure that we're evaluating each dyad case by case, that we're looking at what's happening for them. If everything is going great and they introduce a new technique and then something changes, we need them to be able to see how that one thing that they changed is leading to the change that they've seen. We need to be able to point things out for people and ensure that they understand how important that synchrony is that is happening between them and the baby. Even when they are doing a combination of feeding from their body and milk expression, even when they are milk or expressing milk only without feeding from their body, there's still a synchrony and synchronization that needs to happen between them and their baby for the hormonal signaling that they need to maintain milk production and remain healthy. So these are important things for them to understand and to see how techniques which are going to eliminate or minimize contact between them and their baby are going to place a burden upon that synchronization that is supposed to be happening there. So a couple of global resources. I've created on my website a list of resources for you that you'll be able to see and link to. Now, Caring for Your Baby at Night, this is a little booklet that comes from UNICEF. You can print this out online. It's free, very easy to find, and it's really helpful for parents to understand how their baby sleeps, why they wake up, and what they should be looking for. A baby that is waking up to feed and then falling back asleep that's an inconvenient thing, and that's difficult for people to adjust to, but it does not signal to parents that there's something wrong with their baby. People need to know that. They need to understand the difference between signaling that means something is wrong versus signaling that is part of normal development that they may not have been aware of before. And then there's a protocol from the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, which is really more specifically about where babies sleep in safe sleep environments. But it does contain a detailed explanation for you of how to have respectful, non-judgmental conversations with parents about sleep, which are taking into consideration their cultural needs, their desires, and the context of their household. It details research on specifically how breastfeeding and lactation are impacted when solitary infant sleep practices are used. And most sleep training techniques and strategies involve some amount of solitary infant sleep. So that is a good place to start to really think about how these practices and techniques impact breastfeeding and lactation, if that's not your strong suit and that's not the part that you understand, or if you're looking for easy ways to explain those things to parents. That's a really good place to start, because it shows you exactly how there is a very large amount of evidence and research surrounding how breastfeeding is impacted by those types of practices that have to do or involve solitary infant sleep. Now, for a national perspective, and I recognize that our audience today is actually not only US based, but we had at least a few from Ireland that I saw in the chat. Welcome to my Irish friends. For your national American perspective, the American Academy of Pediatrics again has a guide that is mostly about safe sleep environments and not specifically about sleep training. But the AAP does provide many simple, easy to digest articles for parents about sleep and development on their healthychildren.org partner website. Now, the CDC, if you look up information about infant sleep from the Centers for Disease Control here in the US, they simply refer right on back to the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it's an important statement that has safety information that parents need to know. And then they also provide that other information about healthy sleep for parents to use on their Healthy Children website. Then there is the National Action Partnership to Promote Safe Sleep Improvement and Innovation Network, which is a collaboration of organizations which are putting together safe sleep information. And they also provide information that is extremely helpful and useful for parents to understand, so that they have the basics on what they need to know about what is safe about infant sleep, so that as they start to look at a program, a technique, a course, and they see some of the elements of it, they might start to notice that some of the elements of some of the things people are telling them to do not match up with safe sleep information as we know it. So that's another good resource to be looking for guidelines and recommendations and places that are using the research to really help put together what is safe about sleep. They don't make separate or independent, or they aren't making separate or independent statements necessarily about infant sleep that aren't supported elsewhere. So that's a really important thing to know. They're not making their own, because these are already made by other organizations, especially the AAP and the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine as well. So that brings me to one of my most important points here. Where are the international or national guidelines for sleep training? Who certifies people who say that they are sleep trainers, sleep consultants? Who's in charge of that? And I ask you to read between the lines. The answer to that question is no one. There aren't any. There are no international or national guidelines for sleep training. There are no international or national certifying bodies for people who call themselves sleep trainers or sleep consultants. So what does that mean? Is it just an oversight, like they haven't made one yet? Well, if it turns out that that's the case, then we as lactation care providers need to make sure that we are first in line to be part of the action committee, so that lactation doesn't get pushed aside. And we don't want there to be any confusion about how their recommendations will impact lactation. But this brings us back to the point about health equity. If there was information about sleep training that said that it was necessary or it was going to improve health and that everyone needed it, there would be national and/or international guidelines on this, so that everyone would theoretically have access to this information. But that is not the case, because there is no information about this that everyone considers to be reliable. There is not research that everyone considers to be what we should all be following. So instead, we go back to things like the UNICEF booklet, which comes from the research that we have from international sources that talks about infant development, what is normal for babies, and how they are healthy when they have responsiveness and you know, parents who are communicating with them. And so we really just want to make this point here that when you look at any kind of course, training, book, whatever, start really digging into who is offering it. And if they're offering you a certification because you're a lactation care provider or you're another kind of healthcare provider that, you know, wants to do this, under what authority are they offering you a certification? What does that really mean? And what will it mean if you tell parents that that's what you are and that's the certification that you hold? What actually does that mean? Who is the person or the organization behind that information? And I'm not saying that it's always going to be bad and that people have bad motives or that organizations might have bad motives. I'm not saying that at all. I'm asking you, imploring you to look into it as deeply as you can. Know who you are getting your information from and understand that not everyone who says that they can knows how to read research. We know for a fact from other, you know, things that have come through the lactation field, specifically the Fed is Best organization, it's very important to understand the concept of cherry picking evidence and how simple it can be for somebody to use evidence in a way that is misleading. So know who is providing the information that you are getting. It's even harder for parents to understand, to be able to pick these things apart. So it helps when we know what's out there and when we start to really look at what they're being exposed to. It really does help if we're familiar with it, but it's really hard to keep up at this point because there's a lot going on. And there are good people and there are good organizations out there doing good work that supports the best information about infant sleep and development that we have. But we really, as individuals, we have to look at that carefully and know where we're getting our information. I've got that reading list with lots and lots of resources. There's resources that you can send to parents. There's resources for you to read, and article or links to all of the articles that I've cited in this presentation are there as well. I try very hard to only use open access research articles because I understand how frustrating it is to find an article that you are fascinated by and not be able to get in. Paywalls on academic information are one of my biggest pet peeves in the world. So I try to include information that you can access even if you don't have academic or institutional access to, you know, all of those big research repositories. Also, I included all those information about the international and national organizations to follow so that you know what they're saying and you can use their resources as well. So here's our questions that we're going to use to help our clients who are seeking sleep training solutions. Let's just take a second here to reflect on who our clients are and why are they looking for this information? Well, since the dawn of time when people have babies, they understand very quickly that babies don't sleep for 8 hours at a time or 10 hours at a time or 12 hours at a time. And they are experiencing a huge shift in not only who they think they are and what they think they're good at, but the abilities that they feel they have and their own personal health, their own personal sense of well-being, which is severely impacted by sleep that is suddenly disrupted, consistently disrupted, doesn't ever feel like it's working for them. One of the biggest things under research that I could find recently was that they are doing a lot of research to consider how blue light and screens are impacting people's sleep, and in particular babies. So one thing that we know is that many people today in, you know, modern times, if they wake up during the night, they look at their phone or their device or their, you know, anything with blue light and a screen. And that does impact wakefulness in adults. There is research showing that, and we know there's research on adolescents, and there's starting to be research on babies as well. So if there's one thing that I could say is different from the time when I had babies and I started in this field and what I see today, is that almost every single person that I talk to absolutely looks at their phone if they're woken up in the night to do milk expression, feeding their baby, or any kind of baby care. And that can make people feel less rested than they would if they didn't. And that can be an extremely hard habit to break. People really feel bored and they feel restless. And so that's the response that isn't, considered normal nowadays. So that's something that you can definitely be talking to people about as one way of trying to help them feel more well-rested, but also considering the fact that we don't really know how all of that exposure to blue light, especially during the night, is impacting babies and their different types of circadian rhythms that they have. They are slightly different. So it's important to help people think about how sometimes the things that they're doing may be impacting how rested they feel. We want to remember how important this information is to people. It's why they're seeking it. It's why they're Googling sleep training, and it's why they're so tempted by all of the social media messages that are marketing programs and techniques to them. So here's something that we need to start with too. The baseline for optimal care of the baby and young child, as established through this article here in Ethics in Early Life Care and Lactation Practice. And this is basically the life's work of Darsha Narvez. And this piece right here explains the evolved developmental niche. Part of our responsibility as professionals, as healthcare providers, may be to educate parents about their baby's needs and support them in meeting those needs because they may not have ever seen them. And this goes back to when we think about trauma-informed care and how many people have been exposed to trauma in their life and how many people were not raised in a supportive environment that was optimal for their health. So they may not have these skills or this knowledge in this context because they didn't experience it. It's not what they've seen. And that's one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, they may simply have been part of a family where responsiveness was dismissed and it was, frowned upon to be holding their baby or responding to them all the time. And that's just what was done for the people that they knew or the people in their family. So we really want to talk to parents about the baseline. And this baseline was developed using the anthropological and the neurobiological evidence for optimal care of babies and young children. And these are the things that it involves. I'll go through this really super quickly. So this is reliable, repeatable features of stimulation and experience. So when we talked before about responsiveness, that's that repeatable, consistent response. These serve as the primary basis for the development and maintenance of species typical behavior. So this is things like soothing perinatal experiences, calm gestation, no separation of baby from mother at birth, no painful procedures, affectionate touch, being carried or kept near others constantly, and no negative touch. Responsive care, keeping infants and young children optimally aroused and content in order to keep biochemistry favorable for rapid growth and promote secure attachment to primary caregivers. Perceiving and accurately interpreting infants' cues. Breastfeeding on request, frequently for 2 to 5 years. Allo mothers, frequently cared for by responsive individuals other than mothers, like fathers and grandparents in particular. Positive climate and social support, self-directed social play in the natural world, and nature connection. So sure, some of those things don't have to do with what we're talking about here, but this is a whole entire developmental niche, which if we can teach parents about this and help them understand how all the things that they're doing are all contributing, they may feel less inclined to worry as much about sleep as being this totally critical, oh my goodness, we have to do this exactly right kind of thing. Each one of these things is important, but all together they contribute to the optimal development. So if one of these things isn't there, if we're working with families that have decided that breastfeeding is not on the table and they're going to use milk expression in bottles, or they're going to feed breast milk substitutes in bottles, they've still got a bunch of stuff here that they can do, right, to promote or optimal development. So there's many things that parents are doing to contribute, and it just helps to give them this sense that it's very hard to mess it up, right? And that's one of the things that happens with sleep. It starts to become this thing that they put all the pressure around, especially if they're struggling with feeding. So if they're feeling like they're not getting close to their feeding goals, or they're totally off track with their feeding goals, they're feeding way differently than they thought they would, then sleep can become a thing that, well, maybe if I do this course, or maybe if I try this technique, I can control that one thing. The thing is, we can't control everything, and it's very hard to really control anything. So it's helpful to teach them that optimal development happens in this very large context of many things that they can do over many months and years. So that's an important context to give them, so that they don't feel unnecessary pressure around any one piece of caregiving. So they're thinking, is something wrong with my baby because they're waking up? Am I doing something that caused it? What will happen if I don't fix it? And if we can reassure them that all of those things are, it's fine, it's normal. Okay, great. But seriously, this is hard. So how do other people deal with it, right? What happens when they don't get satisfying answers from people like us? There's no shortage of people and businesses that want to take their money to resolve their fears and anxieties. Mental health for mothers and parents is impacted by infant sleep, even when it's normal and the parent is healthy. Sleep deprivation and fatigue impact decision-making behaviors. So it's really important that we always take it seriously, especially when people are asking questions about it, and that we're giving them really helpful solutions and a safe person to talk to. So this is what we're going to do to take action. Here's how we're going to help them sift through the information that's out there. We're going to have conversation-based education. We are talking to them, with them, not at them. And we are teaching them how to consider any advice that they're coming in contact with about infant sleep, so that they can figure out if that's something helpful for them or it's something to leave behind. Is it safe? So we know that sleep training is not synonymous with safe infant sleep education. So we should always be looking for the part where they talk about safe sleep environments and make sure that it matches up. Whatever people are being told to do, we need to make sure we are the ones comparing it with what we know about safe sleep environments. Like, for instance, you might point out, so I don't see any part here, if they're talking about putting the baby in a crib, I don't see any mention of the fact that nothing else should be in the baby's crib. Or maybe even we're looking at materials from a program or a course, and we see that they're using pictures that demonstrate unsafe cribs or unsafe sleeping environments. Those are really important things for us to be able to point out and to help people look for. So if a sleep training program or course or consultant or whatever has the best interests of this family in mind, wouldn't it include information about safe sleep environments? Wouldn't that be the basis of what they're talking about? That's one of my big questions here, okay? Now, is the information scary or prescriptive or even predictive? Like, if you don't do this, here's what's going to happen. Parents need to know that any sleep information which is overly scary or prescriptive is probably not going to be helpful. There shouldn't be any ultimatums, and if it feels like a warning instead of an explanation, then it's less likely that parents are going to be able to use that information in a useful way. So we want to make sure that the information they're being approached with is gentle and it's more explanatory, instead of things like, well, if you don't do this, then this is what's going to happen. Is it blaming? Is there blame being assigned somewhere here? Is it making the parent feel badly about how they've previously been approaching their baby's sleep? Are they thinking, oh, wow, I could have been doing that? Is it predicting a poor or an unsatisfying result that will be their fault if they don't do it this particular way? Blame and shame are never supportive of parents' mental health overall. We know that. We don't scare people with, when we see that they're doing something which is unsafe, we don't scare them. We explain things and we approach them in a way that they can hear our information. So sleep information should be coming at them in the same type of method. Scaring people with inaccurate information is also harmful. So we have to stand there in the breach of that and make sure that parents are not being attacked by the information or feeling victimized by the information that they're being provided. Now, then we want to help them consider, is this realistic? Is it realistic or practical in your family, in your house? Do they have space or the equipment for their baby to sleep in a solitary room, for instance? Are there conflicting parenting or work or sleep schedules for the parents that would make it really difficult to follow this program or routine? This is not unrelated. This is how we help families together integrate information that they can use into their life. We are supporting parents and their ability and their capacity to sustain breastfeeding and infant care to their own end goals. They shouldn't have to change their mind about what they're going to do because of some sleep information. Is it compatible with what they were hoping to do with their baby, whether we're talking about feeding goals or we're talking about any other type of goals? Is it matching up with the vision that they had of being a parent? Is it causing them to alter their plans or goals? So, you might hear this come out as like, well, I was planning on introducing bottles after this many months, but on this program, they say that night bottles are less intrusive, so I think I will start sooner. That would be a place where you could point out that this information really shouldn't be interrupting their vision or their plan or their goals in any way that is going to make them think later, wait, hold on, why did I do it? I thought I was going to do it this way, and then I ended up doing it that way. You don't want them to later blame themselves for something that they changed when it actually wasn't even necessary. And is it accurate? Is it evidence-based? As always, we need to consider the source of any information about infant sleep and development. What's the starting point of their information? Where's the data? Where's the evidence that's peer-reviewed in journals and anecdotal? Or are they using something that's debunked science? What's the stated purpose of the information? Are they trying to help families prevent a problem? Are they trying to help them create a better or a safer sleep environment? Are they trying to help parents cause the baby to cry less? Are they trying to help families relieve parent and caregiver anxiety? Are they trying to help the baby sleep better? And what's the definition of better? Who can profit from selling them this information? So all of these things need to be considered when we think about the information basis that is being used to create this type of a training or program or course. And possibly the most important information here, aside from the safety, is it culturally appropriate? What is the cultural context of the information being given? Does it match up with the client's own culture? What is important to them and what is important to how they were raised? What is important to the people who are around them? If this information does not fit within their own learned and lived experiences, then it's going to be really hard for them to wrap their heads around it and make it work. So if the information that they're coming across for a sleep training program says that responsive parenting is harmful, and results in these 3 negative things. But then they think back on their own experience and they think, well, my parents responsively parented me. How can that be right? It doesn't make sense. It conflicts and it causes them a lot of conflict. And so, we want them to think about what is important to them. If extended family access to them and their babies, if they live with extended family, if cultural norms are, surround what they're doing, it can be really hard for them to make a lot of changes that are simply being, suggested by outsiders. Is this something Is the sleep training program something that is generally compatible with their ideas about parenting? Are they being given big changes to make that don't feel great? Or are they being given, smaller suggestions about little minor changes that they can make to their routine or how they respond to the baby? There's just so many ways that we can give people helpful information that does not cause conflict for them, without them feeling like they have to adopt a program or a routine or a schedule that is really doesn't feel right and isn't really compatible with what they felt like they wanted to do. So these are just some of the things that we can use to start these conversations. And often when we start to talk about them, people figure out the answers themselves. We don't have to bring them all the answers. All we have to do is help them know what questions to ask about what they're considering. And then finally, I just wanted to make one note, and there might be a postpartum doula or a nighttime doula here listening to this right now. This concept of a postpartum doula, especially one whose services include things like providing assistance to the family during the night. Is it incompatible with breastfeeding completely, or is it just another way of implementing a type of sleep training? No, not unequivocally. It depends. It depends on the person. So if families are considering hiring a person to do some nighttime help or, to provide them this type of care, they need to sit down and have the conversation with them about what this person can do. They might need to ask questions that feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, but what I want you to know is that there's no standard here. This is an individual thing. So you could encounter a postpartum doula or a nighttime doula who barges in with an agenda of how they're going to do things, or you could encounter one who is there to, fit into what the family actually wants and needs. Families simply need to make sure that they are hiring people, just like they would with a childcare provider, who matches up with exactly what they want. They should be hiring people to help them in the ways that they want them to be helped. And I don't feel like as lactation care providers, we should just shove this concept aside because we think right off the bat, well, there's no way lactation works with that. Well, it's our job to help people find ways to help it, to make things work together. So it's important for them to have those types of conversations as well and make sure that the person they're hiring is willing to follow what they want, according, to the parents' choices. So they should have those conversations together about all the ways they've chosen to handle things so that they can make a plan and make it work. This might be something that they really, really need, that's really going to make a difference to their health and their ability to, again, sustain infant caregiving and meet their feeding goals, as long as we are encouraging these types of conversations. A couple of final thoughts before we wrap it up. We, as lactation care providers, we have this intricate, complex responsibility in this work. We are charged with supporting babies and parents and breastfeeding in a balanced way. Sometimes, though, in the context of that, we have to help parents make choices that disrupt the synchrony or the balance. We have to help them do things that don't, on the surface, seem like they're going to contribute to balance. For example, sometimes parents have to reduce their breastfeeding practices or their human milk feeding volumes to protect their own mental health in the context of their busy life as a parent of multiple children, or working outside the home, or parenting without a partner. Sometimes they have to disrupt their own infant feeding goals when a subsequent pregnancy is high risk. Sometimes they have to make personal sacrifices that they never imagined in order to pursue their vision of what feeding and caring for their baby requires. And that puts us in a really unique situation where we have the ability to help people face a situation they really never thought they would be in. And when sleep training conversations arise, it sometimes can make us feel a little overwhelmed or frustrated because, we may, and maybe I'm projecting this onto you because this is the way my brain works. It can seem really simple my response in my head is always, please just ignore all the sleep training advice and everything is going to be just fine. but that's not realistic, right? That's why I have a filter and I only say the things that are smart to say out loud. That's dismissive. It's disrespectful. And even though, sometimes our brains might go there because of what we know, we need to respect what they're asking for and what they need. And the marketing of these sleep training advice and programs and things like that, it's not going to magically disappear. It's not going away. So people aren't going to be able to just ignore it and, it'll just be gone magically. But parents are also going to struggle with adjusting their lives to how babies and children sleep, and they're going to seek solutions. We hold information that is really key to helping them choose solutions that are going to be the least disrupted to their feeding goals and the feeding goals that they tell us that they have. So things like, that could be helpful. It could be like bedtime routines, soothing rituals that are family centered and affirm the family's own culture. That's really our role. That's our place. And that's why we do this really difficult work. And that's why we approach these complicated conversations. That's why we work so hard to be good at what we do. We can do it. We are qualified. We're educated to talk to parents about infant sleep beyond the simple conversation about safe sleep environments. We can help them look for information and solutions which will guide them to support their babies and their family's sleep without sacrificing their lactation goals. We can remind them that their babies are individual people with unique needs and that families throughout time and across continents have adjusted and learned how to get rest and sleep without disrespecting their baby's needs or sacrificing their own well-being. We can make a difference and help reduce the tension and stress around infant sleep. So I want you to know how thankful I am to all of you for everything that you do that supports babies and families and health. And I invite you to join me on my website. I have lots of resources there. And if you go to the website and you want to find those resources I talked about earlier, just go up to the top right. There's a little menu up there and you can find the little tab that says sleep training, or just right at the very top of the homepage, there's a search bar and you can search for any topic that you want to find. And if you type in sleep, you'll get all those sleep resources. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you again to the hosts for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Christine. Do you have a few minutes? I know that we have about 10 minutes before we log off for some questions. I did make a couple of notes from the chat box, and we do have a couple, if I could share those with you.
Sure.
So this one is from Deborah. Will the snow be discussed? SNOO. I'm not sure if you covered that, or maybe in your website you might reference that.
I didn't cover it specifically. I really think that if we just think about sleep products, all together, if we just kind of put them all in a pile and we think about what they do and what their goal is, and one of the things about products like that, which, if you look at what they're designed to do, they're designed to help a baby sleep longer and, be less startled and not wake so frequently. It all goes back to that. It all goes back to that, less frequent waking and trying to make a baby have less needs, basically, essentially is what that's doing. And it's just like, really tightly swaddling a baby or putting a baby in a dark or quiet place for sleep. Those are not necessarily the most supportive ways for a baby to develop. Babies need to be exposed to, sound. They need to be able to move their own hands during sleep. They need to be able to move their arms and their hands so that they can signal when they need to feed. And babies are supposed to startle. They startle for a reason. So products which are kind of designed to lessen those things, what they're doing really is they're lessening the parent's need to respond to the baby. And we just don't have evidence that that is the best way for babies to develop. It's the opposite. We have evidence that babies are, they wake up and they startle themselves and they wake up to eat, and sometimes they wake up for other reasons. And our role as caregivers is to respond to that and to provide them with what they need and to make sure that they can go back to sleep. And there's no evidence that any other thing is helpful or healthy. And all those other things sort of feed into the convenience factor of, you know, caregiver responsiveness to the baby. And we just have to ask ourselves if it's really actually safe or healthy to do that, especially on a very consistent basis. And, you know, there are definitely times when there's families who use things sparingly because they also have concerns about that. So you can't ever say a product is the wrong thing, but any product can also be used to excess and, you know, potentially cause problems that, you know, we don't even have information about, especially when they're kind of new products like that specific one.
Okay. Thank you, Christine. We have another one here about white noise. What about white noise for sleep? Is it good for the babies?
That is a good question. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of my very favorites, I hope you will go and listen to the Huberman Lab podcast, and I will put it in the chat. He recently did, this man is an ophthalmologist and a neurobiologist, and he talks about all kinds of topics, not specifically about babies, but he had someone on who was talking about sound recently. And he was talking about this. It's actually not good for anyone to hear white noise during sleep. I'm going to put the name of the podcast here in the chat for you, the Huberman Lab podcast. And his name is Andrew Huberman. He's a scientist and professor at Stanford. But the episode is pretty recent and it's about sound. Our brains sort of attune to different sounds that we hear. And there's something about that they think might be detrimental to babies to be hearing white noise all the time or for long periods of time, but they're not really sure. So it's kind of another one of those techniques where, okay, so maybe we should do it sometimes, but not all the time. We know it's really effective. Like lots of people sleep with white noise, but they're starting to look at, you know, a lot of the effects of that and seeing if it's something that we really should be doing or maybe not. It's a really great question. Oh, good. There's somebody on here who already listens to the Huberman Lab podcast.
And I'm going to be sure to check it out as well.
It's
awesome. There was also a reference to the NAPPSS. Yeah. Online, is there a link that's on your website? I guess
yes, it is.
For it. I think maybe it was a little harder to just Google it, but it is probably on your website.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure
so
is.
We'll be sure to head over to her website and you'll be able to access the website through there.
Yes, absolutely. And there's also a handout that you're going to get in your email from Claudia, and it has the questions that we talked about to start conversations with parents and families so that you remember how to do that. And it does have those links on it as well.
Yes, thank you. And I know we had some issues here, and I do want to apologize on behalf of our planning committee on the technical difficulties we were having with those being able to locked in and having like our capacity maxed out, which we didn't think we had our capacity to be at 300, but there were some issues on that. We are recording it, so I do apologize to those who were not able to log in. As soon as I'm done, I'm going to download it and get the link out to everybody that registered. So they'll have the link to the recording by this afternoon. And again,
wonderful.